This event was really envisioned by Students for Nuclear, which is a network of young people in the nuclear energy space who are passionate about the role that nuclear energy can play in addressing 21st century problems. The speakers today are students and workers spread out across the sector, but also friends who have gotten to know each other through their involvement in nuclear energy. NREC, or the National Reactor Innovation Center, is focused on demonstrating advanced reactors, as well as working to ensure that the technologies that we demonstrate are scalable and deployable. And that means working to ensure that they're affordable and that they meet customer needs. It also means connecting with communities, those that are supportive of the technologies, those that have concerns about the technologies, and those who aren't familiar yet with the technologies. And storytelling is a powerful way to connect with all of those communities. So I'm really pleased with the opportunity today for NREC and Students for Nuclear to partner in this webinar and to try to bring us all a little bit further in our journey to communicate our stories. Today's speakers and facilitators are excited to help the audience work on their own storytelling skill set. So now I want to just extend my gratitude to Students for Nuclear, as well as all the volunteers who've organized this event and who will be sharing their stories and facilitating the sessions, but also to everybody who has joined today and made the commitment to learn more about how to communicate with communities and to improve their storytelling skills. Because I think that that skill throughout our industry and the efforts around the nuclear industry and nuclear for climate will be pivotal to the success of our efforts to make nuclear available to address our greatest energy challenges. And now you'll have the opportunity to hear an amazing story from River Bennett. So River, if you're there, you can turn on your video.
Thanks, Ashley. So thank you for the introduction, and thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us for this interactive webinar on nuclear narratives. Students for Nuclear started as a platform for young people entering the nuclear energy space to share their personal stories as a way to better engage with communities outside of our own. In our past, we've delivered communications workshops to help people develop their own personal stories, and today we're excited to bring this experience online. Someone needs to mute because I can hear. Perfect. So I want to start out by introducing, next slide. So I want to start out by introducing the next generation of nuclear workers. We are at a pivotal point in time where advanced nuclear technologies and careers are maturing and creating a new sector built around the challenges of the 21st century. There are countless stories explaining why individuals are choosing to enter this space. We believe that developing those stories and leading with them in our day-to-day conversations can help us to build bridges to other communities with whom we can learn by sharing experiences. Next. So as Teddy Roosevelt said, people don't care what you know until they know that you care. And I think this is an important thing to keep in mind for our sector. We are highly technical, highly educated, and we often feel comfortable communicating among ourselves based on the types of shared knowledge that define nuclear energy technologies. However, our shared dialect does not extend beyond the boundaries of our network, and building relationships outside of the nuclear space requires finding common ground. Telling personal stories that elucidate our common values, hopes, and fears can be the first step towards finding and establishing that common ground. So as I mentioned, next, we've done this training in the past, in person, and are excited to present it for the first time online today. The program we've broken down into roughly two parts. To start, 4 of us will tell our personal stories as examples of the type of storytelling we're talking about. And then after that, and for the bulk of the webinar, we'll be doing our training. My friend Emma will explain more later about how that is going to work. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my friend Pierre-Clément, who will be the first one to share his story.
Thank you, River. Hi, everyone. So on the next slide, you can see I come from a very small region on the west of France. And like everyone, I'm convinced that the region I grew up in is the most beautiful place on earth. So on the next image, you find those islands that we have where every dot on this island is basically a bird. And those are natural reserves and are very precious and but very delicate too. And on the next slide, you see that those birds have been threatened by oil spilling. So this is, for example, a boat that on the left, you can see a boat that sinked and generated oil spills and is still generating oil spilling since the 80s. And on the right, you can see another one that happened when I was roughly 6 years old and really damaged the coastal area and the ecosystem. So growing up with that in mind, I went on to study science and engineering that you can see on the next slide. And I developed, engineering abilities and the scientific understanding, and I wanted to use that for the environment, but also for human society. So on the next slide, when I was deciding what to do with that knowledge and scientific knowledge, I was also noticing that in France, we only emit a tiny little bit of carbon compared to other countries, like Germany, for example, and that's because we have a lot of nuclear energy. And you can see Germany, that has more renewable that we use in France, still generate way more carbon, and that's mostly because they phased out of nuclear energy after Fukushima. And so I realized that nuclear energy was really a great solution for the planet and for human society. So on the next slide, I show basically what my path was. So I decided to go to Penn State to start a PhD in nuclear engineering that I recently defended, and I actually started working on INL yesterday. So I'm still, going through the onboarding process. And this is because I'm extremely passionate about the science and the technology. And the message, thank you for everyone clapping, I appreciate it. But the thing is, technical solutions alone, I think, are not enough. Having more nuclear energy being used everywhere is a social, economical, and political challenge. And I think that's why it's so important to tell our stories and say why we care about nuclear. And one person that does that even way better than me is Charlyne, my very good friend Charlyne, who's going to speak next.
Thank you, Pierre-Clément. So if you go to the next slide, my journey began in Jamaica, where my family and I, we experienced energy instability, especially during natural disasters. And if you move on to the next slide, it was no surprise that I took a keen interest in science and technology at a young age to try and find solutions. Moving on. So when I moved to the United States, I first started in renewables, specifically solar energy, for obvious reasons, being growing up on a tropical island. And so my goal here was to maximize the potential of solar as an immediate, large-scale solution. But the trouble here was that, but the trouble was that then, and it still is true today, that solar energy does not have the capacity to produce energy on the large scale that I wanted. So then things started to change when I met a nuclear physicist called Nicky Peters from the University of Missouri, and he expressed to me that nuclear energy might be the solution that I was looking for. And not only that nuclear had a carbon footprint that was as small as, if not smaller than that of solar, with added versatility, so nuclear has applications in medicine, in agriculture, and industrial processes such as desalination and hydrogen production. And after that conversation was essentially the turning point for me, where I knew I wanted to become a nuclear engineer. So moving on from there, being introduced to a new world of energy introduced me to like-minded individuals who also are dedicated to maximizing the benefits of nuclear energy while minimizing its associated risks at the same time. So where am I now? I'm currently in the process of completing my PhD in nuclear engineering from the University of Florida. Moving on from there, my goals are to the right. Okay. Moving on from there, my goals are to continue to promote nuclear energy and education, as well as to promote the globalization of access to carbon-free energy so that I can create a new energy future, not only for my family and my friends, but also for the entire Caribbean region. So that's my story, and I'm going to hand it over to Emma to share hers.
Thanks so much, Charlyne. If you go to the next slide, as Pierre-Clément said at the beginning, I also think I grew up in the most beautiful place in the world, which is Montana. This is the view from my grandparents' house that I got to, see every week. In the next slide, or the next picture, you'll see this is a beautiful hike that's nearby. There's like nobody out here. And this is the kind of thing that I was inspired by, just love of nature, love of being outdoors, that got me interested in environmental issues. And so on the next slide, based on my interest in environmental issues, I decided to go to Lewis and Clark College in Portland, Oregon for a degree in environmental studies. So I was like, okay, environment's in the name. We're going to take care of that. While I was there, I took a semester off of college to live in an organic permaculture farm on the coast of Ecuador. And here's me on the horse I had at the farm. I named the horse Ohm. I'm wearing a Bob Marley shirt and kind of looking like the stereotype of a Portland environmentalist. In the next picture, you'll see that this is me in Peru. I lived in Peru for 6 months as well, and I studied volunteer tourism. So that's studying a lot of non-governmental organizations that are trying to help the local people. And one thing that I found while I was traveling to all these NGOs is that the people who are the most effective at helping themselves are the local people themselves. They know how to take care of their culture. They know how to pursue what they want. And one thing that I observed both in Ecuador and Peru was there was mass urbanization. People were looking for opportunities. And so when I came back to the United States, I realized I wasn't going to be the person who could directly help these communities, but I could help by helping to develop clean energy solutions. During that time, I started, and from there, I started reading a lot about energy. So on the next slide, you can see that I decided after reading a lot about energy that nuclear was the only one that was able to scale and be clean, so it wouldn't impact climate change. So I went to the University of Idaho in Idaho Falls for my master's in nuclear engineering, went back, got all my engineering prereqs, and now, she's in the next image, I work for Oklo, which is a company providing clean energy solutions. It's an advanced fission company that really aligns with my values of providing energy to places that have very expensive electricity while making sure that it's clean. And now you get to hear the amazing story of my good friend, River.
Thanks, Emma. So at the risk of not sounding original, I will say that my story also begins in a beautiful place where I grew up, where I was embedded in nature. So I was born and raised on Nantucket Island, which is a small island 30 miles off the coast of Massachusetts. And like most people who grew up there, I spent a large portion of my time on the water, swimming, surfing, fishing, and sailing. But even for those who don't take part in these ocean activities, you can't really escape the realities of living on an island, or an isolated island out in New England. Routinely, we have winter storms knock out the power, and there are no bridges to the mainland. So that means you have to get comfortable with the feeling of being marooned whenever bad weather cancels all the boats and the planes. Next slide. So from a young age, these themes associated with water continued in my life while growing up, and I developed an early interest in the causes and impacts of limited clean water and sanitation access around the world. Water access is an important developmental linchpin when it comes to raising collective living standards. Gaining access to clean water reduces the risk of illness, empowers women, and creates the necessary time and space for enterprise to grow. No other cause seemed as important or foundational to focus my energy onto. So I fundraised, I volunteered, and I worked for organizations in the space, including Global Brigades, Water for People, and Charity Water. The experience not only taught me more about this global issue, but it also exposed me to the delicate process by which technological solutions can become sustainable solutions. Next. So I pursued these topics further as an undergraduate at the University of Virginia, where I majored in the most liberal artsy degree I could possibly find, political and social thought. PST, for short, is an interdisciplinary politics major offered by UVA, where my interest in water and sanitation expanded into energy access and climate change. Studying the modern history of energy through books like The Quest led me to appreciate the scale of the effort needed to update our energy infrastructure this century. This newfound interest also introduced me to nuclear power and the emerging advanced nuclear sector. After graduation, I moved from the US to Spain in order to explore another part of the world while continuing to learn about nuclear, its challenges, and its opportunities. Serendipitously, I came across a blog post one day by a young woman who grew up with similar interests, spent time abroad, and ultimately decided to go back to school for nuclear engineering. That person is Emma Redfoot, and after an email followed by a conversation in which I essentially asked, "How do I do that thing that you are doing?" our friendship began. Next. So in 2017, I made the same decision to go back to school for nuclear engineering. Emma and others in the space were immediately welcoming, and in 2018, I was fortunate enough to participate in the Nuclear Innovation Bootcamp, which eventually led to the opportunity to work for Dr. Finan at the Nuclear Innovation Alliance. Throughout this time, I've continued to study the role for advanced nuclear in this century while building relationships in other communities. Next. So this January, I achieved my first goal of beginning a master's in nuclear engineering. I am currently an MS student at the University of Michigan with the support of NRIC and the Fastest Path to Zero initiative. Similar to the lessons I learned from my work in clean water and sanitation, my research today looks at the ways a technology like nuclear can integrate into the communities looking to update their energy infrastructure. More specifically, I'm examining stakeholder and environmental justice considerations for the siting of advanced nuclear power plants. I'm excited and honored to be working with NRIC and Fastest Path as we look more holistically at the development of these reactors. So without further ado, we're going to get on to the interactive part, and Emma is going to show you all how that is going to work.
Okay, so I know it sounds like we're all like very practiced because we did practice, and can tell this like right off of the just off the cuff. But the reality is we all had to work at it, and it doesn't necessarily come as naturally as we would like to. So you heard 4 personal stories this morning, all somewhat different. I found it personally meaningful to develop my own narrative, but it did not come easy. It took practice, and honestly, it took writing it down for me to be able to communicate my personal reasons for supporting nuclear. In order to practice talking about nuclear, we'll be focusing on reflecting on 3 topics. First, developing your personal story, like what we just told. And then second, we're going to think about awareness of public concerns. And it's important that we do this in an empathetic way. Being an effective advocate means listening for people's real concerns and addressing the underlying concerns. You will have breakout group leaders who will help you practice in empathetically addressing people's concerns with nuclear. And then last, we're going to discuss how to leave on a hopeful message. I think in nuclear, we too often lead with the perceived negative. So airlines don't say, we do not crash that often. Nuclear should not say, we are not that unsafe, or jump into just talking about Fukushima and Chernobyl. Instead, talk about what makes you excited and hopeful and the world that you want to see nuclear help support. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so now for the interactive part. This requires everyone's attention. There will be 2 main parts to the interactive part of the webinar to help get everyone thinking about how to tell their own story. The first part will be answering 2 poll questions. Then we'll break you into breakout rooms. In each breakout room, you will have time to discuss the poll questions and share your stories. You'll have a breakout group leader who will help facilitate the discussion. After the breakout session, we will all come back to the main group and share the poll results. We'll do this 3 times. We're doing this in part because it's fun to hear other people's stories, and as well as to hear stories that may appeal to different audiences. So when you leave this webinar, you won't just have your story, but you'll also have heard other stories. And at the end, given if we have enough time, we're going to come together as a big group and share some of those stories that came up, if you're comfortable, and your breakout group leader will ask if you're comfortable sharing with the group. I'll now hand it over to Charlyne, who will explain how to navigate to take the first set of polls.
Okay, so before we get started with the breakout sessions, I'd like to introduce you to your amazing group leaders who will be helping you to develop your own stories through interactive discussions within the breakout groups themselves. Okay, so how do we do it? Okay, so if you have a computer or a phone nearby, you need to go to www.menti.com and use the following code in order to access the first prompt. Here we'll be looking at 2 poll questions, and you should be seeing the first one right now, which asks, what made you interested in nuclear energy? And you have a couple minutes to answer that question.
The menti.com and the code is also in the chat.
One other note is that you'll be able to see the responses to these polls after you've come back from discussing the prompts in your breakout sessions. I see some answers are still coming in. We'll give it some more time. They're still coming in. We have about 26 responses. Okay, so I'll be moving on to the next prompt, which asks the question, at what age did you become interested in nuclear energy? And if you use the same code on the same website, you should be able to submit your responses for the second prompt. We'll give you guys just a few more seconds to get your answers in. Okay, all right, so let's go to the next slide where we are going to go into breakout sessions. So don't be shy. This is the part of the webinar that is interactive, so don't be shy. Please turn on your webcam, unmute your mic when you're speaking in your breakout sessions. And so what you'll be doing now in your breakout sessions is to, you'll be guided on how to tell your own personal stories, as well as, have open free discussion on the questions or the prompts that you just engaged in the Mentimeter. So without further ado, we'll have our breakout sessions begin, and our leaders will start the breakout session by first sharing their answers to the poll questions. Emily?
I have started the breakout rooms. One moment, please.
Thank you. Okay, we're waiting on everyone to come back in. Still climbing in. All right, so I don't know how you guys felt about that breakout session, but I can personally speak for my breakout session that it was really good, and I learned about someone's story into nuclear, and it was different from mine or different from anyone else that I've heard before, and I thought that was interesting. So let's go into the results of that first poll so we can start to look at what are the key areas or the key topics that got people interested in nuclear. And so from what we can see here is that climate change is is a really big one, and that makes sense, especially in today's society and current environmental space, that we all know climate change is a thing, and that we are working towards meeting international net zero targets. So climate change is a top answer. We have environment coming in next, and then physics. It's interesting. We have some we have some physicists. We have a good amount of physicists, must be, for physics to be third on the list, and then nature, which aligned with climate change and environment. So it's good that we get to see these answers, because in the next question we can.
Vous avez joint.
In the next.
Veuillez.
Okay, so in the Aries, you're fine. In the next poll result, we can start to see or try to correlate those reasons why people got interested in nuclear energy to the age ranges. Someone put the womb. I'd be interested to speak to that person on how they got interested in nuclear from the womb. Just as a side note, we need to talk. So what we see here is that the age range is between 10 and 20. That's the most popular. And so we can almost try to correlate that with the responses before of getting interested in nuclear because of climate change, environment, and nature. And we can see that people are starting to do that from a young age. We do have some people who got interested in nuclear at a later age, but it's very promising to see that we have, people becoming interested in a clean energy technology at a very young age. So that's very promising for us to look towards how the branding of nuclear will evolve, given that we're having younger people becoming interested at an earlier age. All right, so this ends the first polling and breakout session, and so we're going to enter the next phase, where we're gonna again give you 2 poll questions using the same website, using the same link, and the question prompt that you should see on your screen should ask you, what do you think are the public's biggest concerns with nuclear energy? So send in your answers, and I'm gonna give you a couple minutes to do that. And again, once you go into your breakout, once you come out of your breakout rooms, you'll be able to see the results from these 2 initial polls. Welcome back. Everyone here, is everyone back? Or are we still waiting for people to come back from breakout sessions?
Yes, those few of the rooms are still closing.
Okay.
Yes, I get to talk about the biggest concerns, and I think we have a resounding answer right here. So this is actually what I put down as well. I put down waste. And I think this is a pretty important conversation, or an important topic to be able to speak intelligently, but also empathetically about. And so I think this is something we can talk some more about in the breakout sessions. But it's interesting to see that this is what a lot of people voted for. So waste was big, accidents were also important, disasters, radiation. So those are the main ones. I think it really comes down to the safety and waste, which I think you'd probably see in a lot of polling anyway. So we can discuss that some more in our breakouts and think about ways to discuss those and have more open conversations about those. So let's go to the next one. All right. Economics, waste, and environmental justice were the top 3. Interesting. So I think waste and economics, or waste for sure, definitely lines up with the responses from the last one. Economics is an important one for sure as well. We see a lot about that in the news all the time. And then environmental justice. And I think, again, this is what the breakouts are going to be for, is to discuss these a little bit more in detail among smaller groups. But I think some of these concepts are a bit younger. I mean, environmental justice is, as a concept in the literature, is only about 30 or so years old. And so there's a bit more nuance to that, and a lot of exciting opportunities for us to think about how we can address and improve on those fronts. So again, we'll discuss this some more in the breakouts, and we will now do the 3rd and last round of polling. So go back to Menti, and we'll go through 2 more polls. The first one is going to ask, we're kind of looking towards the future now. We're going to be a bit more aspirational. And the first is going to ask, what inspires you the most about nuclear? So yeah, hopefully you all have answered the first of the last polls so far. So that one was asking what inspires you the most about nuclear energy. And then now the second of those 2 polls has opened up, which is asking what will be nuclear energy's greatest contribution to the 21st century? Cool. So I think we're pretty much ready to go back to the breakouts. And just as a reminder, right, we just went over the poll results from the second batch, and the issues were kind of predictable, right? We're a lot of the ones we hear about in the news. So waste and security and safety. So we can discuss those a bit more in the breakouts, but also on a more aspirational note, talk about what we are looking forward to accomplishing in this century.
Where's Jake? Yes, I know Sarah.
Oh, okay.
Wherever you are.
Sorry for all the conversations that got cut off. I know that there's a lot to talk about. I mean, nuclear's cool. It's exciting.
Okay, everybody is back.
Okay, sounds good. So thanks everybody for sharing your stories, for being willing to participate, for taking place in the polls. I'm going to show the results of the last 2 polls here. So I'm going to go to the next slide. Okay, what inspires you the most about nuclear energy is innovation. I mean, that's I think that's something that we can all show a lot of passion around. I think what matters the most in communicating is one, to listen to people and listen to what they care about and try to reflect that back and provide them with stories or information that helps them in those values. But I think second, it's what do you care about? What gets you like super stoked? And to speak about something from that perspective, because even if something isn't intrinsically interesting to people, if the person talking to them is really passionate about nuclear, or is really passionate about the subject, then I think it gets them really excited. So I encourage you all, when you're talking to people about nuclear, to first ask, to try to figure out what they're concerned about, and then to speak to that, and then, to speak to the things that make you really excited. Okay, so let's see the next slide there. Okay, for the public, or what will be nuclear energy's greatest contribution to the 21st century? Decarbonization is the biggest one. Clean air. Space came up a bunch in my group, which was awesome. Powering space is on there. It's little though. So this is saving the planet. Yeah. It's got a lot of work to do. We all have a lot of work to do. And I think that sharing these messages with the world is what is going to make nuclear able to do these things. The way that we get to the point where nuclear can decarbonize, where it can help with clean air, where we can, even have better space reactors, is making it so that people understand that those things are only really possible when we use nuclear power. So I think this has been really interesting for me. I appreciate the conversations that I had and talking with everyone. I'm now gonna take a little bit of time and call on people that are willing to share their stories so that we can hear a little bit more about what brought other people into this industry. And Pierre-Clément, you had somebody in your group that was willing to share her story?
Yeah, I think Shirley Rodriguez has an amazing story. And Shirley, if you're able to unmute yourself and tell your story in a few minutes, that would be awesome.
Yeah, just let me know when I can start.
Go for it. The floor is yours.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Shirley Rodriguez. I am from Peru, and I discovered nuclear energy when I was 13 years old. One of my math teachers was talking about how powerful the nuclear of the atom was and how we can help people And my country is a third world country, so there's a lot of poor areas. So in my mind, I always have, yes, with this, I can help them. They can have electricity. They won't die from the cold. So yeah, I just want to do reactors and help people. That was my main thought. I never knew anything about radiation or the capabilities or any other benefits from nuclear. And then my country didn't have that career, nothing related to nuclear. So I thought that my dreams were crushed until I came to the US when I was 21 years old. And then I worked for almost 10 years and nothing related to nuclear. And I decided to go back to school and fulfill my dream of becoming a nuclear engineer. So I have a bachelor's and master's in nuclear engineer. And now I'm designing 3 small modular reactors, which I love. And I'm so grateful to work with such an amazing team of smart people. Yeah, that's my story. And now I'm trying to communicate my passion to other people in a way that they understand me, so they can support nuclear energy and love nuclear energy the way I do, and try to help the world. That's it. Thank you for listening.
That's amazing. That's a lot. One thing that, you had there's a lot of interesting parts to your story. One thing that you hinted on is also just like your colleagues are amazing. And that's one thing I also found when I came into the nuclear sphere, is that I was really impressed by everybody that I got to work with. Both, they're smart people, but a lot of people, it was because they really had arrived at nuclear needs to be part of the solution to the problems in the world. And it was always impressive to hear people's stories of how they got to that point, or what they want from it. So it looks like, Charlyne, you had somebody in your group that was open to sharing their story.
Yeah, so I have Marina Sesam, who is also a Gator, and she'd like to share her story. So Marina, if you're still here, go ahead.
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Marina Cecim. I'm originally from Brazil. I'm a fellow Gator with Charlyne at the University of Florida, and I'm a PhD candidate in material science and engineering. I see some Gators popping in the screen. Yeah, my history of nuclear, I discovered nuclear when I was in high school. I was very engineering driven. I was looking for a cool challenge, cool major to go to college. I found out about nuclear. We, at the time, Brazil was investing in nuclear engineering. We had a very cool nuclear submarine program that was very exciting at the moment, and I thought nuclear would be a great major. This was pre-Fukushima, so I was not aware of the challenges ahead of me with the advocacy work that I would have to do for nuclear. And from my college, I discovered all the benefits, and it's undeniably beneficial. You cannot get to know nuclear energy in a technical perspective and not support it. I know you're a very biased sample, but I believe everyone here can agree to that. From my college, I also discovered material science, and I thought that was also very challenging and interesting, and therefore I went to the nuclear materials field. Right now, my current research has nothing to do with nuclear, although I am still very interested, and I highly support nuclear and all the advocacy work. Therefore, I'm always involved. So yeah, nice to know you all.
Thanks so much, Marina. That was awesome. Yeah, it's really nice to meet you as well. And I hope that everybody here also views everybody else on the everybody else is people who are interested in advocacy. Like, you all came, you all were willing to go and actually practice. So that means that you want to be good communicators, which is it's wonderful to see that's something that I've witnessed, is there being a lot of passion for people wanting to get word out there of how nuclear is important. And so, okay, so Richard, it sounds like somebody from your group was open to sharing.
Yes. Susanna, would you like to talk, please?
Yes. Hi. And I'm here because of Pierre-Clément, so thanks for the invitation, Pierre. So just quickly, just to share my story that I went over with, and thanks, Richard, for your help. Basically, why I chose nuclear was I started out co-oping in gas power plants and coal power plants, and I learned about some of the nuclear plants they had, kind of got interested in the chemistry, and then I think what really hit home for me was learning about the high energy density. That was pretty wild, and then like learning how that happens, and that sort of led to your one of your other questions, you know, what inspires you for nuclear, and I think for me, the nuclear reactions in general just inspire me. I think it's wild to think about what's really happening here, how we create energy, which is probably really different from a lot of other people's passions. I think a lot of people here have really been passionate about the environment, and I am too, but if I'm being honest on why I sort of chose this direction in my life. So, and I'm studying nuclear engineering, by the way, but so it's very interesting to be surrounded by people with a different outlook on that. And then when you guys asked the question, what do you think is the public most concerned about? It was nice to know that what I think the public is concerned about is also what a lot of you guys think as well. And I think it's safety, and I think it's just so hard to be able to convince, or I guess that's an answer to the next question. What can we work on educating the public on what we're working on? So maybe it is safe, but convincing people that it is safe is just so hard. And so I'm interested in learning how to do that a little bit better. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. And yeah, I think that it's an ongoing thing, because how you talk about nuclear, how you talk about safety has to come from a place of being empathetic and being understanding when sometimes it's hard to be. And so I think that, like, you know, practicing is what we all need to do. And you know, there's lots and lots of opportunities once we're allowed to leave our houses. But also, you know, speaking from what you're passionate about, at the end of the day, I'm a nuclear engineer as well, and I will talk about what I think is cool about the technology. Like, it gets people engaged. But you know, okay, so Aries, you had somebody in your group that was open for sharing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Vignesh, I thought you wanted to share a little bit about your story in India and economics.
No. Hey, Pierre. Hey, Charlyne. So I'm not, the story is not like about my career. It's about what we discussed, mostly on economics of nuclear power plants, and also how I communicate to different set of people to promote nuclear. For example, in I believe that economics is something which we have to address in nuclear technologies, because of the construction cost and procurement cost. And so I believe that economics is something, if we address economics, we can really advance nuclear. However, let's come to the public discussion on nuclear waste. So normally I deal with two sets of people, one from the west, one from the east, from my country. From the west, they take nuclear for granted. Because I stay in France, people in France take nuclear for granted, and they want to close nuclear power plants. And they always talk about waste, and it's really hard to convince them, even though France has a very good nuclear reprocessing facilities, and they are having a closed nuclear fuel cycle. They kind of have the best technology and milestones for handling waste. However, in India, when I go and talk to people, they don't care where the energy comes from. They don't care if it comes from gas, coal, or nuclear. They don't care about nuclear waste. All they want is cheap energy. Because India has a growing middle class, and people there don't care about what the environment is like. They want their socioeconomic status to grow. So if you're going to build a nuclear power plant, you say, we are going to provide like 1,000 jobs for the nearby citizens. They are fine with that. And you can build it. They don't care about the waste. They just want 24/7 power, cheap power. That's it.
That's an amazing story. I think it's it's something that really resonates with a lot of people, and it is, you know, down to the economics. At the end of the day, we can create really cool technology that we think is interesting, but it needs to be cheap and power the world. And I think that's the story that, you know, that inspired me to look into energy, is that there's just so many people in the world that don't have electricity, that if they had it, they could do so many cool things, and I want to see what they do. You know, just like the world could have so many more cool ideas, great art, you know, that could come from people if we all have access to electricity. So those are some amazing stories. I think that, you know, it helps me to hear these things. That makes me feel inspired. It makes me feel energized to go out and talk more about nuclear. I hope that this webinar has had that same impact on you all. Emily or Cheyenne, could we get the presentation up so that we can just do the final couple of slides? I just want to note that I've enjoyed the chat. I think that some good points have been brought up. Lenka brought up, you know, we don't need as many facts. We need more things about how to talk about this stuff. I hope that we touched on that a little bit here, but, you know, waste, for example, one tip that I'm just gonna leave out there is I usually follow up when people ask about waste. I follow up with what are you concerned about the waste? So I can actually talk to what their real concerns are. So are they concerned about how long lived it is? Like in that case, it's like, well, if you care about the future, then you know, that's why I care about nuclear, is because this is a way for us to provide a clean environment for the future, while also providing a means of powering the world. And so it's important to talk about these things from a perspective of listening to what their concerns are, really digging at that a little bit. So like, what are you really concerned about the waste? A lot of the times, honestly, people they don't know what to say to that. But that can help even just get those gears going of like, what is the actual fear here? And then try to address those specifically, and at a certain point pivot to talking about what you're passionate about, because I think we've all been trapped in conversations about nuclear. Many of us have been trapped in conversations about nuclear that end up being just talking about Fukushima and Chernobyl, and we never get to why we think this is so important. So Pierre-Clément, I'm gonna hand it over to you for the very end here.
Sounds good. Thank you, Emma. So I'll try to go quickly, but I think we cannot finish this webinar without thanking everyone, and especially the group leaders, the breakout group leaders that helped us out. You did an amazing job. I'm already receiving like great feedback from the people saying they had a blast. So thank you everyone for putting in the work. That's the time that if you want to put the clapping thing and just like continuously press on it, it's the moment. I also want to thank everyone that from NRIC that helped us put that together. Would have been totally impossible to do something that cool without them. Everyone that helped, from changing the slide to helping us create the content. And I also want to help everyone that showed up to this webinar. I hope you had a good time. I hope you're gonna, you know, follow up. And yeah, I see people clapping. Keep it going for everyone. I hope you had a good time, learn a little bit, learn about other cool stories, learn about other people, and let's keep in touch. So one thing I want to do is just homework questions. I think it's great, you know, we all need like practice to come up with like these stories and share these stories and convince more people. So the first homework question would be, how can you bring your personal story into a discussion about nuclear? How can you, you know, instead of just sharing facts, how can you make it more like of a personal story that can reach people and touch people's heart? I think that's very important. And if, you know, if people's hearts are going to be touched like Susanna with the science, then use the science. That's great too. That's a very valid, cool thing to mention. The other one would be try to listen to people and what their concerns are. And I saw in the chat people are trying to ask, you know, advice about how to address the problem of waste, or like the perceived problem of waste. I think that's a very important thing to do, you know, try to think about what the concerns of people might be and how you could address them during discussions. And the other one, I think Emma touched on that thing a lot already, but I think it's really important, so I'm going to say it again. It's really important to end up with a hopeful message. And that's also what we're going to do for this seminar, is that I think the future for nuclear is very bright. And I'm very excited, very hopeful seeing all of those like amazing people that I met today. And so thank you very much. And in your stories, try to bring that hopeful message so that people leave the discussion really dreaming about nuclear as much as possible. But hopefully they do. And then for the last thing, I want to mention just a few ways that you can reach out to Students for Nuclear here on their website, Facebook, Twitter, email. Also, don't hesitate to reach out to anyone that you met during that webinar. If you think that someone had a cool story, don't hesitate to reach out to them and be like, "Oh, I love what you said. I wanna get to know you. How did you come up with that story? How did you develop it? Or I have some concerns. I don't know how to create my own story. Can you help me out with that?" I think anyone here would be very, very happy to do so. So just want to conclude saying thank you to everyone again. Don't hesitate to reach out, and hopefully you learned a lot from this webinar. And it was as cool for you as it was for me. So thank you, everyone, and see you next time.